and we're going to discuss applications of energy heating your homes. Just make your way to the stage. Welcome, everybody.
Good morning, everyone.
Mike, take it away.
I will when I'm Good morning, everyone. Okay, this is an interactive session. We are expecting to hear from you, so just very quickly, I'm going to try one more time. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That's a bit better. That's a bit better. So please do get your phones out. Keep them on silent, probably, even though I'm sure it's fine in the background here. And do use the code, the QR code here to join Slido. That's the way you put questions in. We won't be going out to the audience. They'll come through to an iPad here for me to use, and I will be putting them to this incredible panel we've got here today to talk about the applications of energy in heating homes. We're going to cover how we're going to achieve carbon neutrality in residential and commercial heating in buildings, which basically means getting off gas. And we have some of the best speakers we could possibly have to kind of tackle this topic for you today. I'm Mike Pitts. I lead the program at Innovate UK on net zero heat, which is how we do innovation to deliver that actual transition we're just talking about. Innovate UK, for those who don't know, is the UK government's innovation agency. We've got a big stand at the front there, so do come and say hello afterwards, where you can sign up to our newsletter and updates from our program, and maybe even get funding somewhere down the line. But without any further ado, we're just going to get each of our panelists in turn to introduce themselves, say where they come from, what their interests are, and maybe some of the controversial points they'll put across today. So, Inga, shall we start with you?
Great. Lovely. Good morning, everyone. Inga Jirgensone. I'm the Group Head of Business Development at Energy Saving Trust. We are an independent and trusted voice in energy efficiency and low-carbon heating solutions. We work with governments to deliver some of the energy advice and retrofit programs and support businesses who wish to engage their customers and staff on their net zero journey. When it comes to low-carbon heating at homes, the key points I would like to get across today is the importance of engaging the general public, importance of providing impartial and trusted and tailored advice to consumers, and well-designed financial support mechanisms that make low-carbon heating technologies more accessible. And also thinking about the demand side, which sometimes get a bit overlooked when it comes to supply, focusing on supply, because the most efficient energy or the lowest carbon heating is when you don't need it and you don't need to generate it. On that basis, that's a quick update for me. Thank you.
Niki?
Great. Lovely to be here today. I'm Niki Kesharaju, Senior Decarbonisation Manager at National Grid. And I spend most of my time looking at technology, market and policy developments in the world of heat, transport, industry, and also which way hydrogen might go as well. In terms of heat decarbonisation, I spend a lot of my time looking at barriers and enablers, and basically looking at all of the different technologies and which way the consumer voice is really going to go.
Thanks, Niki. Cantor.
Hi, good morning. My name is Cantor Mocke. I'm from the Heat Networks team within the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. And we're largely about cost and the cost of the transition and making sure that the transition is as cost effective as possible for consumers, but also for the taxpayer as a whole. And that's what really drives us. And that's why we're very interested in communal systems, whether that be at a building level, whether it be district heating or campus networks, because we think there is real value for the energy system as a whole and for the customer in working communally on heat, because ultimately heat is a local issue, and we're going to have to transition from this model where we have this sort of centralized generation pumping into homes to more local solutions. And that's what we focused on, and very glad to say that we published our response to our consumer protection consultation yesterday, so the consumer is at the heart of what we do. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome, Cantor. Jan.
Hi, everyone. Jan Rosenow. I'm the director at RAP. We're a think tank based in Brussels, but also in the US, China, and India. And what we do is to help governments and regulators to create better and more effective policy to drive the clean energy transition. Heating is a major focus area of ours simply because it's a vast chunk of emissions. It's the biggest source of emissions in the UK economy when you put together buildings and industry. So we've got to do something about that. And one of the areas, I'm sure we get into that later, that I did a lot of work on is electrification, but also district heating. How can we scale that? What are the barriers in the way? But also hydrogen, which is always coming up in these discussions. Maybe we get into that later, Mike. I don't know if you want to, but I'm
very happy
to comment on the hydrogen discussion.
Brilliant. So you've kind of heard the position from our panel here. Just a reminder, please do just point your phones with the camera on to the QR code. That'll take you through to Slido. That's where you can put questions that appear here for me. There's already some coming in. What you can also do, if you just want to be nosy, is go in and vote for the ones you think you want to hear. They'll come to the top of my list, and maybe I'll ask them. Who knows? But yeah, we're going to get through as many questions from you as we can. But let's just open, going back to the first topic Niki raised around innovation barriers. Obviously, you're running innovation programs on heat for me. I'm fascinated to hear what all the panel think are some of the key barriers to innovation for helping us move faster in this. Because as Jan says, we've got to decarbonise heat quickly. What's getting in the way? Let's start with Niki and then we'll move around. Come on.
Yeah, sure. So looking at the consumer, because I think really all innovation starts there first. Broadly speaking, to decarbonise heat, the barriers kind of sit in three broad buckets. So there's a lack of kind of awareness around heat decarbonisation in general, but also what technologies are out there. There's obviously cost. Currently, the upfront costs for a lot of technologies are still quite high, and the recent boiler upgrade scheme, which is the grant for heat pumps, still pitched the cost of heat pumps at approximately about 13k, which is still too high for many homes. But then the most important part is the consumer journey, and that's incredibly convoluted and can be quite drawn out, especially if you consider that heating is a choice that is typically a bit of a distress purchase. You know, people tend to have their boilers kind of go out on them in the middle of winter, and then you need to make a decision, you need to make it fast. So with all of this, it's really looking at how can we try and simplify the way our consumers choose which technologies they want to put in their homes, because consumer choice is really key. And yeah, try and innovate in reducing some of these barriers so we get to that decarbonisation goal a lot faster.
Why is it boilers always wake in the winter? I mean, they work all year round, okay? Yeah, I had one break on Christmas Day, which is just perfect. So the consumer being at the heart of it, Inga, maybe you want to come in on that side?
Yes, absolutely. At Energy Saving Trust, we empower millions of people to take more informed energy choices every year. We run a heat pump specific campaign recently, reaching over 2.5 million consumers. And consumers want to know more about technologies. There are a lot of myths out there. There is still a lot of misunderstanding. So getting that consistent messaging or raising that awareness, making people more comfortable with these new technologies is really, really key.
Well, on the subject of myths, Jan, I mean, you're always out there busting myths around heating. Any comments to make on how we get the messages across better about the options?
Well, I guess you're referring to a recent piece I've written for Carbon Brief, which was, I think, titled 18 Common Myths Around Heat Pumps. And why did I write that? Well, there's a lot of misinformation in not just on social media, but also in the national media, unfortunately, in the UK. And when you look at, and some people have analysed this, whether these articles are accurate and more positive or negative, spreading doubts and misinformation, that has really shifted over the last 5 years, where now the majority of articles that are being published in the UK media are quite negative and often inaccurate, or at least they're not really objective in how they look at this technology. So if you want to read up on it, you can find it on Carbon Brief, 18 Myths Around Heat Pumps. It's been quite successful. Will it actually help dispel some of the myths? I'm not so sure, because the people who really don't like change and don't like any of this, whether it's district heating, whether it's heat pumps, hydrogen, they will always be doubtful until the very end. But I think there is a majority of people who are now looking at these technologies and are actually willing to look at the evidence, and there is great evidence, not just from the UK, but from around the world, that these technologies work, and they can be scaled, and they can be scaled quite fast if we have the right regulatory framework.
They're not particularly new technologies, are they? You know. Yeah. Cantor, so we mentioned heat networks there as well. What do you see as the kind of barriers to all sorts of heating technology, including heat networks?
Yeah, so I think I agree with Niki, particularly around the customer, and I think a bit of innovation about how we think about the customer, because we tend to think about the world from our own perspective, but there are different groups of customers. We live in different places, and the solutions for different places are different. So I think there's a real communication and helping people to make decisions. I agree with that. I think the other thing is cost, and Niki mentioned that as well. So for us, cost is a big thing. But one of the good places to start with cost is what you're wasting. And that for us is a big area of opportunity for heat networks, because London did a report several years ago on how much heat is wasted or released into the environment, and there's a huge amount that could power a large proportion of London. So I think that's one of the big areas of innovation, is how do you get people who have heat and are not using it to work with the people that can distribute it. And often we see the commercial discussion as the problem. And so it's how can we innovate in that space to enable more conversations and relationships to be built that are not sort of broken by that commercial discussion.
Yeah, I guess for investment in that, you need long-term security of supply and demand, which is an unknown picture right now. Is that part of the issue when you mean commercial discussion?
Well, that's the traditional problem, isn't it? So, and particularly where we are for heat networks, we don't have many, so we're not like many of the other European countries where they have sort of excess of 25%. So we're starting them, and often the conversation at the starting point is, I need a heat source, so you need to supply me heat for this many years, and the person who's got the heat, that's not their primary business. And so these are some of the things that we need to get through, and we as government need to facilitate that. But I think there's also what's reasonable for the sector to expect through this process is one of the things that we need to think through and innovate.
So one of the most popular questions that's come through is coming back to that kind of cost question. Where's the money going to come from for decarbonising private homes? Obviously, there's a lot of public funding directed towards social housing, but so for the able to pay market, what's the barrier there, and what's maybe the solution? You want to start, Jan?
Yeah, I can take that. I think most of the capital will not be public sector, not from the general budget. It will come from private investors, from individuals. I think the key to unlock that is to create a business case by making low carbon heating cheaper than fossil fuel heating. And currently in the UK, we're still in a position where often the fossil fuel option is just cheaper. But when you look at the life cycle costs, the total cost of ownership, that needs to change. I'm sure once you change that, you will have lots of investment going into that. We already see signs of that. Companies like Cantor working with institutional investors like Legal & General, for example, to invest in large capital intensive ground source heat pumps in London. I think the same will happen in other areas. We see companies like Era, major air source heat pump installer now. They are backed by Vargas Holding, one of the main funders of the low carbon transition in Scandinavia. They are the people behind the Northvolt factory and H2 Green. And they're currently looking at how to do that. Will they do it before the election? Not for sure.
Era is Arla. What's the name? Era. They're particularly innovating in the model as well, aren't they? Aren't they providing it on a lease basis?
Yes, so you can basically spread the cost over a very long time because these assets have lifetimes sometimes of 40, 50 years. Some of the boreholes will last for more than 100 years. So you can actually spread the cost, similar to what we do with gas networks, electricity networks. We spread the cost over very long periods of time and then socialize these costs. So there are models like that out there.
Niki, did you want to come in there? Did you say? You want to come in there? Or Inga?
I was just going to agree and say that.
Go on.
And there are some really good examples internationally as well of how this is managed through government programs and one-stop shops. We did a very interesting study for the Climate Change Committee last year, looking at international best practice and how the policies have been designed to best accelerate retrofit and low carbon heating uptake. And some of them specifically look at the kind of able to pay market, looking at how do you design the journey to support with grants, maybe different tiers depending on the income levels, and how you can also leverage some of the private finance, looking at the one-stop shop models that may emerge in the private sector, where that gives that opportunity to offer different financial solutions to able to pay market as well.
Yeah, and building on what Jan says, some of the businesses we've been working with in the heat program, and we can see a huge shift in the last year in terms of what I would call aggregators, those that are going to collect the kind of the private sector demand and then funnel in both the supply chain, the installer base, the skilled installer base to do it properly, and crucially that finance side of it. And you've got ones like HeatGeek now who have also paired up with OVO, an energy supplier. And once you get your heat pump fitted by them, which tends to work very well because they've got some of the best installers, you will then get your electricity for that heat pump from OVO at 15 pence a kilowatt hour, which makes it half the cost of having a equivalent gas boiler. And it's those kind of things that really start to move the needle here. And they really are focusing on that customer journey, but they're not the only one. We can see energy companies wanting to move into this space, and I think it's going to become a very active area very, very soon. So it's an exciting time for innovation in that space. So moving on to what would have been a question from me anyway, and it's brilliant that it's come in from the audience here, and I'm probably going to start with you here, Inga. Is consumer advice feels disjointed and patchwork? This is a great phrase question. What's your wish list for getting the right information to households, and who or how is the best route to do that?
Great question. We are big advocates of a government-supported, comprehensive, impartial advice service. We have seen success already in Scotland, where we deliver Home Energy Scotland program that provides that one-stop shop advice and funnel into kind of installations and financial support then. There are program in Wales. There currently isn't really the same level of support available in England, so that's a great opportunity to actually look at how that can be designed so that it does provide that national level messaging, engagement, trust, impartiality, and then work nicely alongside the regional advice provision, alongside the private sector, one-stop shops to really funnel customers through a trusted...
So your wish list is one-stop shops?
One-stop shop is my wish list.
I'm going to say the power of the community, right? So heat is really interesting because when you look at who the trusted advice providers are now, they're typically your installers, right? So your gas boiler engineers that come in, and that's where consumers typically get their trusted advice from. At National Grid, we've really seen the power of working with community energy groups to really help identify who those key voices are in these places, in these communities, that can really put that message out there on how to enable heat decarbonisation. So we've partnered with Regen and released a community heat guide that basically advises community energy groups and what they can do to help make heat decarbonisation happen at a community level. So it's really kind of harnessing those people that are going to be the end users that I would really highlight is a superpower.
A lot of other technologies have worked the same way in terms of rollout, haven't they?
Yeah, and you know,
other
a
people's
lot of
experience
the times,
matters more that you're hearing directly from people you know and trust. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you know, speaking about innovation, it's not always about the technologies. Sometimes it's about the processes and kind of, you know, the approaches as well can be super innovative. So, yeah, community energy is a big one here.
Here, Cantor.
So this is one where I don't think I am the expert in this area, and I think this is the area where, as Niki said, the challenge is how do we do this well? There is something about time, though, that I think is really important, because the question applies to different people at different times, and so targeting audiences is really important in this process, because at the moment it tends to come across as a bit of a moral discussion. You know, this is the right thing to do, but that's really divisive in one way, and I think that's the risk that we face as we get into the culture war aspect here. So I think we really need to think through this. I think there's an element of industry coming together and not giving competing messages, really challenging. But it's important because divisive messages, as Jan talked about, are really difficult to unpick. So I don't have the magic solution. I'm very interested in solutions and ways to do this better.
Anything to add, Jan?
Maybe just two examples where this is happening. I mean, Nesta, I think it was last week or the week before, they launched a new scheme where you can visit your neighbor's heat pump. I don't know how successful it has been, but it's an interesting offering, isn't it? You can sort of talk to someone you trust, see their installation. Another example from district heating, I think there was a village in Cambridgeshire that decided collectively to get rid of oil because they were all on expensive oil boilers and wanted something that was different, low carbon, maybe cheaper, and they switched to district heating. I think that's still being built, it's not ready yet. But these are both great examples, I think, that are community-driven rather than by technocrats like myself who will tell them, oh, this is a great technology, it's very efficient. So great examples out there.
I absolutely feel that this is an experiential thing. I still remember the first time I went into a passive house building on a windswept moor outside Dundee and closed that door, and the silence, the stillness, the lack of, it's not like a warm at one side of the room and cold spots on the other. It was just lovely, and it's tangible, and we need, I guess, the more people can experience that, the more they can want it. Another aspect we think is really important is the health side of it. If any of you ever had air monitors in your home for when your gas boiler's on or your gas hob, you'll get rid of them pretty quick because it's awful in terms of some of the issues it can create for health. I'm also told if you get MHVR, then you're in a position where you probably don't have to dust again, which that's a good one for me. So yeah, rather than teaching people about payback, we should be teaching people about the wider benefits to improving their home because it's an environment you spend so much time in. So we've got the question, so I get to ask it. Jan, does hydrogen have a role in the future of home heating?
Well, if any, then it's going to be a small role. I mean, the main role I see is perhaps in an industrial cluster where you have waste heat from hydrogen electrolyzers that you will then feed into district heating, no doubt. It should play a role there. Will it be used in individual gas boilers? I think that's highly unlikely. I've looked at all independently funded studies that exist on this topic that I could find, so not funded by any industry, not funded by the electricity companies, the gas companies, the heat pump companies, funded by public research grants and philanthropy. And none of those studies suggest that hydrogen will be a cheaper, more efficient option than looking at the alternatives. You make of that what you will, but I think the evidence is pretty clear, and consumer costs are projected to be about twice as high compared to the district heating electrification route. So I think that is more or less decided intellectual argument, and the government has come out very clearly last year saying there's not going to be a major role for hydrogen in heating. The decision still needs to be made in 2026 about the future of the gas grid. But I think all the evidence that I have seen, and also what the government is now saying, really points against the direction of large-scale hydrogen for heating.
Any further comments on that, maybe, from any of the panel?
So I would say the government's response to the Climate Change Committee last year was there's a no regrets option as we progress with electrification and we wait for the decision and we wait for the information. Ultimately, depending on cost, there potentially is a role for hydrogen as one of the backup options for heat networks, a role that gas can play. Hugely, so I wouldn't take it out of the equation completely, and we'll wait for the decision. But yeah, the government's very focused on getting on with delivering what is doable now.
One of the great benefits of working in Innovate UK is you're looking across the whole economy, and across net zero we can see hydrogen's got a huge role to play in some other sectors, and there's only going to be a limited amount we can produce, and it has to be kind of almost reserved for those higher value sectors. And it will always, green hydrogen will always cost more than the electricity it's generated from. So using the electricity directly is probably a benefit. That's the way we look at it, and it's out of scope for the program I run on that basis. Well, sorry to Cantor, to stay with you though, with district heating. What can enable and spread district heating as the solution for heat? Why is it more often than not disregarded in the UK, given its proven success?
Well, the one thing is we tend to see the future as we see the present and the past. So heat networks or district heating is not a big feature in the UK. The other factor is that the nature of our economy is we are a little bit more individualistic in nature than many of the other European states. And so that does have a factor in how we do things. But the big things are, for us, is it's a community solution. So you really need people to come together in some form to enable it. And Jan mentioned the Swaff and Pryor example. We've got some great schemes in Gateshead where local actors have taken a leading role to bring it forward. And so that's why, as part of our sort of strategy going forward, we're bringing forward heat network zoning, and that's an opportunity for local players to take a decision that heat networks are the solution for them. The other thing is to signal where they value, because I mean we're a big country, we're very different places. These are potentially a fifth of the country, so it's not everywhere. So signaling where it's a value, and that's part of what heat network zoning will do, is like in these areas it'll be the lowest cost, low carbon solution. Hopefully that will direct attention and manage some of the coordination issues.
Well, as you say, they tend to work as systems, so you can add tech to it once you've got it in place. You can add heat storage. I'm only just learning this recently, which starts to bring the cost right down, and in some cases it can be the lowest, form of heating cost, which is fabulous, right?
I think currently as well, we're at 2% of all of our heat is from heat networks, and that's going to grow to about 18%.
Has to, yeah.
So a lot of these kind of district heats are going to be either extensions or sort of new builds, basically. And with obviously Ofgem being the new regulator for heat networks, I think the implications with kind of new regulations like Future Home Standard as well, there's going to be an increasing amount of these heat networks that are going to shift towards electrification and heat pump connected solutions, and that brings in your point around storage as well. So it's really a kind of whole ecosystem trying to decarbonize at scale, and local authorities are all over this. Increasingly we're seeing that they're at the front of understanding where could heat networks or district heat work in their patch.
Yeah.
Just a quick addition. I think looking at our European neighbours and what they're doing with heat planning, I think they're a step ahead. In the Netherlands, for example, in Denmark, now also in Germany, in Switzerland, local authorities are now required to actually draw up heat plans in consultation with the residents, businesses, and these heat plans will need to be translated into action. They're not just plans sitting on a shelf. That zoning is helpful, but it's not going to give you a mandate to actually do anything. Whereas in some of these places I mentioned, you can actually then have the power to say, no, this area will be district heating. That will no longer be gas. We decommission the gas grid in that area. And the European Union, I know we're no longer part of that in the UK, but there's a new directive requiring all cities with more than 45,000 people to do that in the coming years. So the UK could really, I think, follow suit and give local authorities a bit more power to do this. To draw up these plans, because it's a very local issue, I think, as you all said. We've got to look at local heat sources, local demand to connect them, and that can't be done by government.
No, completely. So the heat zoning stuff is on its way, though, isn't it, Cantor? But yeah, could it go further? One of the issues for local authorities is capacity, and we at Innovate UK, we have a net zero living program where we're helping support and provide some of that capacity and expertise for local authorities that want to go faster in this space. And if any more information about that, please go and visit our stand. I'm contractually obliged to tell you. The next question is, again, very popular in the voting. Please do get on there and vote. There's so many questions, we might have to do a quick fire round soon, I think. Would you say the market entry barriers for new heating tech are the same for homes compared to commercial or industrial sectors? I've got some thoughts on this, but does anyone want to start on that one? Is it easier just to adopt something in an industrial setting than it is putting it in someone's home? I mean, that's...
For homes, the biggest barrier is the scale, isn't it? Because you are dealing at smaller scale systems, so you do need the numbers, the volumes, and consumer buy-in, I guess. But on the other hand, I guess it's easier to trial something something small than something grand, isn't it? But that's just...
well, maybe let me put it another way. So we have this situation where, of course, you have the EPC system, you have SAP, you have various certification as needed. This basically to help you avoid messing up the building physics, which, of course, we're still trying to understand, and when you're adding in different technologies. And we've certainly seen the barrier for new ideas, new innovation, the process isn't really there to certify them quickly. It's been designed around the incumbent technologies, so it is an issue. So is there something we could do to smooth that path? Yeah.
I mean, just quickly, I think industry is more complex. The process heating industry has been called hard to abate for a reason by many people, and that's mainly because there are so many different processes, different sectors, different activities. So it's not like buildings where you have a limited set of options, really. You can improve the building fabric, you can swap out the heating system, maybe a heat pump, or you could do district heating, maybe even hydrogen. But in industrial sectors, you have many more technologies, and the processes are more complex. This just makes it harder. It's less standardizable compared to buildings.
Yeah.
And we haven't really had that discussion in this country about industrial heat yet. I think it's going to come, but most industrial heat is based on burning fossil fuels. So there's a huge task awaiting us, and no one talks about it.
That's probably where we do need hydrogen, right? So any thoughts?
So I think the thing that I was thinking about is I do think the homeowner is a little bit more of a difficult segment, just because they are diverse, and who are they going to trust? But I do think for industry and particularly sectors, they have trade associations, they have working groups, and there's a real opportunity to share learning, and something we're really trying to encourage through our sectors. How do you share learning, but not just the good stories? We're very good at saying, oh, weren't we brilliant at doing this? But it's actually, we did this, and these are the bits that we got wrong. And so I think there's a real opportunity in the business sector for trade associations, for organizations like yourself and for others to share lessons so we don't all need to make the same mistakes.
That's a good one. I'm going to keep us moving through, so do give me an indication if you really want to answer any of these questions as we go. We're trying to get to everyone's. What is the panel's view on options for off-gas grid heating? There's 1.5 million homes in the UK that aren't on the gas network. Not all of them will work for heat pumps, so what's the view?
Well, so in community type options, we are getting some options coming through already. So Swap and Pry is an example where community have come together and done basically a ground source loop. And there are suppliers doing that in the new build market as well. So I think we are seeing some innovations in that space already. Not for every scenario, but in some spaces, yes.
I think it's worth mentioning as well the recent boiler upgrade scheme statistics. I spent a lot of my time looking at this and tracking it pretty much month on month. A lot of the kind of vouchers that were leveraged were actually off gas grid homes. So, a lot of them are clearly moving towards heat pumps, certainly initially anyway. So yeah, that's a kind of huge growth area, and they're going to be the first movers for this market, really.
They were waiting for it.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, move on to the next one. I think this question is basically about the spark gap. How can we transfer the green levies from electricity to maybe a pollution tax on gas? Politically difficult, but would that start to help as we rebalance? Because obviously electricity prices track gas prices. Is that sensible, and what do we do about it? And how could a government implement that?
I mean, I can take it because we've written a whole report on the different options and what other countries have done. So one option, of course, is to transfer all the levies, which I don't know whether everybody in the audience knows what levies are. I presume most people do, but basically they are policy costs for past renewables programs, but also energy efficiency programs, for example, that sit on electricity bills primarily right now, also some on gas. But it's about, I think, 10 times more on electricity bills compared to gas bills. And if you shift those levies away, you can put them in the general budget that the government pays for them. That's what the German government has done with the feed-in tariff scheme in Germany and the cost on electricity. Or you put them to gas bills, which would increase the cost of gas. Of course, that is a very politically difficult choice to make, but it would have the biggest impact because it would not only make electricity cheaper, but gas more expensive. But the politics around it are difficult. And then there's maybe a compromise between those two options, which is what the Danish people have done. They decided to lower the tax for electricity used by low-carbon heating technologies, such as heat pumps. So they have an exemption there, which doesn't require wholesale reform. There are some other options too, but those are the three basic ones that you can look at. My understanding is that Treasury is currently looking at the details, and they said we're going to come out with a proposal shortly. So
which
hopefully
one would you recommend?
Shortly.
Which one of those would you recommend, Jan?
Well, they all have their
For the
drawbacks.
UK.
I think there's kind of what would have the biggest impact, which I think is shifting the levies to gas bills, but the politics of it need to be considered as well. So can you actually implement it? Because we've seen in recent months, haven't we, that policies that were ready to go have been withdrawn at the last minute, like the clean heat market mechanism, but also the ban for off-gas grid oil boilers to be replaced with another oil boiler. So I think it's important to consider the full implications of the policy mechanism before you, sort of jump to a conclusion.
So I'll keep it as moving on. Fabric versus other things. So should we be fabric first? Should we be putting in PV and air source heat pumps? What's the right kind of combination? Is fabric first a barrier, basically, is a question. Go on.
I can have a go at that. I think fabric first generally is a sound principle. It makes sense, but that shouldn't be the only answer in every case. You don't want the perfect to get in a way of progress. One of the myths that we were busting in our recent campaign was around the insulation, because the evidence shows that the heat pump works well enough in homes that are not insulated as well, so that shouldn't be really a barrier for people to take the technology. And we need to be mindful that by, pushing the fabric first, that message may land with consumers that they shouldn't be going ahead getting low carbon heating unless they have a well insulated home, because evidence shows that's not always the case. But when we talk about the best practice and how you want to go about things, obviously it makes sense to look at the fabric first and look at the increments from there on. But as I said, it's not the absolute fabric first in every case, in our view.
Niki?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the cheapest energy is the one that you don't use. So, regardless of what fuel you have, any level of energy efficiency is also great. I think where it becomes a barrier is this cost, when the cost of actually implementing some of these other energy efficiency measures just gets really high. That can potentially delay the journey towards moving to heat pumps, when actually, a reasonably energy efficient home is just okay and just enough.
I think the other thing we need to think about with fabric, particularly in more fuel poor homes, is often has a big effect on things like damp and other health issues. And when you're on a prepayment meter, which a quarter of households are, you're paying the highest cost of energy in the first place anyway. So big wins to be had by getting the fabric right on those homes.
Yeah, and the additional benefits, like you mentioned, there's a kind of air quality and public health kind of element to this, but also it helps the grid out as well, right? If we are moving to a world where we're increasingly electric, any level of energy efficiency is ideal.
Don't oversize your heating, does that help the grid out? Jan, I'm going to throw this one over to you, because you kind of mentioned it a little bit before. So which market, residential, commercial, or industrial, do you think is in the most dire need for innovative heating technology? What hasn't got something that's kind of there already that is needed?
I think the technology is there. I think what's lacking are innovative business models and the right policy framework. The technologies exist, and we know that because in other countries they have been deployed at scale. Take Denmark, 2/3 of the country use district heating. So it's clearly workable at a very large scale. Or if you look at Norway, almost all heating systems in single-family homes are heat pumps. So markets can really shift, and the technology is there. What's lacking in the UK is not technology options. It's really the ability to scale them by having the right business models and the right policy and regulatory framework, I would say.
So we've got 5 minutes to go, so I'm just going to throw a couple of quick ones in here. Retrofit policies are currently missing from the regulatory framework. What policies would you introduce, or each of you are going to have one, to better facilitate retrofit to enable low carbon heat? Shall we start? This ending?
On the policies, generally, I think coming back to my wish list, it's around comprehensive, impartial, accurate, and tailored advice that is needed to inform consumers, to allow them to make informed choices and understand what action they can take to improve their homes.
I'm not really the expert in this, but I'm going to go with.
Is it a policy
I
you'd
think
love to have?
awareness. I think just general awareness of what options are out there, and it's retrofit is quite interesting because we've got a project as part of our distribution business called Defender, which basically looks at installing sort of energy efficiency insulation sort of measures versus the needs case to build out the network, and actually energy efficiency and insulation makes sense at the right kind of locations in the right places. So it's not about it's about sort of doing it in a way that it makes sense, and it's driven very much by impartial advice provided to the consumer, as well as the right kind of policy mechanisms to enable it.
Cantor?
For us, when we're looking at heat networks, we're really looking at district heating, and it's providing access. So for us, it's getting the heat networks in the ground so that people can choose them in the places that they need them. And that's what our Green Heat Network Fund is about. It's about demonstrating low carbon technology that it can provide heat at the temperatures that people need and keep them warm.
And Jan?
I mean, one controversial option, again, which is one that is adopted in other countries, is to have minimum energy performance standards at the point of sale. So that's already applicable, actually, in the UK for the private rented sector. So if you are a landlord and you have no insulation in your house at all, you can't rent it out because it's deemed sort of unfit for purpose. You could do the same for all buildings. I'm not saying that's exactly what the UK should be doing, but if you really want to drive retrofit, that will be one of the options. Use regulation to require very basic measures like loft insulation, cavity wall insulation that are not expensive to undertake. In most cases, I don't think we could do the same for solid wall insulation, because then you're talking about tens of thousands of pounds per property of investment. But for the really cheap, low-cost measures, I don't see a reason why you could not, in principle, use that instrument.
Yeah, there was a policy recently withdrawn to force private landlords, to meet a certain, and that's certainly one I'd like to see back. No one's mentioned the fact that retrofit is VAT-able, new build isn't. Doesn't really incentivise retrofit. So, on the same vein, given with 2 minutes left, and I'm sure you'll want to rush to the main stage to watch Ed Miliband. If Labour were elected at some point in the future, what would you like? What's the thing you would most like to hear Ed Miliband put forward from the Labour Party to say this is a policy going forward that would make a difference in this area of heating homes, and that's where we'll finish. You ready, Inga?
About focusing on consumer, well-designed customer journey that really brings people into the retrofit journey.
Fantastic.
I think for me, it's all around certainty to enable better network planning, really, and having those really clear long-term targets. It's just certainty.
Thank you.
It's not really my place to tell the minister what to do, but the one thing I would say the sector would say is continuity. It's very difficult if things chop and change to get investors to come into the market. So I think that's what investors tell me a lot.
Brilliant, and Jan?
I second Niki's point, but add to it, I think clarity about hydrogen and the gas network is desperately needed, because then Ofgem, the regulator, can do all the integrated planning and actually make sure we have the right framework. And the second point I would make is the spark gap, the ratio between electricity and gas prices, sort that out for good, so we really have clarity and we have a viable business opportunity.
Completely, thank you. Right, we're absolutely bang on time, which is my job. So I've had a great fun. This panel's been brilliant. Please show them a usual appreciation. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.